going to introduce sort of sustainable transport from my own perspective. So I thought this is a bit of a brief overview, and please do, I hope I'm not going to give you death by PowerPoint or anything like that. I was just going to introduce myself, maybe some of the basics around transport and climate change, and a bit of an overview, what some of the issues are, and then a couple of short case studies that maybe might give you some ideas, maybe might be interesting, and then sort of talk a little bit about what I see as directions, for transport. So by background, I'm currently a senior teaching fellow in global sustainable development at Warwick University, which is the UK's first undergraduate course in sustainable development. But by background, I'm a planner and landscape architect. I actually used to work in Leamington for a company that did Jefferson Gardens and War Memorial Park and a few others. So I know the area quite well. I also teach a module which is specifically about sustainable transport to our students. So hopefully what we're doing is kind of condensing 4 weeks of lectures almost into a bit of a topic. Okay, I shall move on. Now, I think reviewing the materials, you've all got the idea that transport is quite an issue, and this is something that I've talked about before. So generally speaking, where many of our kind of emissions in many sectors have reduced, transport has been increasing. We know that now transport is the largest UK contributor to climate, emissions, CO2 emissions. And I suppose the point that this is a report by UK stakeholders for sustainable development, which includes things like local authorities, businesses, and it was a report they did a couple of years ago. And what it found was that, I guess what we all know is that transport's been quite hard to do anything about. It's been a tricky, sort of thorny subject. So I've tried not to do too many graphs. I've got them in here. I know you get lots of graphs. The one on the left, I suppose what it shows is that since, in this example, 1950, we've seen really, really steep increases in the number of people driving, motor vehicle movements. We've also seen a decline in, things like bus travel or public transport. I suppose summarising that, this is a report done a few years ago from the Department of Transport in 2017. And what they've highlighted is that the number of car journeys that we make are increasing. The costs of travelling within the UK, particularly by public transport, are also increasing. One thing that, I've done a number of projects in the past about transport as an issue, one with Birmingham a few years ago. I think one of the kind of, for me, underreported problems we have around transport, and this is, I suppose, showing my background as a planner, access is now a problem. So it's a little bit old, but it's quite an interesting piece of research from the bottom right from the Department of Food and Rural Affairs. And what it kind of highlighted is the number of people, particularly those who don't have cars, who struggle to access particular public services. So in this case, the real sort of thorny one would be doctors, but also supermarkets, shops, post offices. My suspicion, if anyone's seen anything more recent, is that we've got a similar problem, So this is, I guess, why it's kind of relevant. So as a bit of a summary of, it seems to me that what we're looking at, we're seeing increasing motor traffic, we're seeing falling public transport use. The emissions that we know from transport are rising. The costs in many ways from a sector is rising. I don't know how much you've talked about it, but this sort of issue of air pollution is very much connected to transport and motor vehicles. We still have concerns around safety. And this, the question that I was sort of saying about access, there seem to be sort of real problems for transport in particular groups, particular locations, and often the high costs of transport are kind of a barrier to particularly the sort of poorest members of our community. So it's something to think about. And I think my summary was of why this is, well, not my summary, but my kind of concluding thought was this one around, it's often still too difficult to do the right kind of thing. So I suppose I was thinking of this kind of bigger question of why is it so hard to tackle emissions from transport? And it seems to me that it's really about how we live our lives. whether it's traveling to work, traveling to home, traveling to basic services. I guess we've got some longer term patterns about how things are no longer quite as local. Many people travel further for work. We travel further to go to the supermarket. We don't do that. And actually, if we look at the country as a whole, what we see is there's a bit of a, people will access particular types of industries in particular locations. Warwick University is an interesting one. Lots of our lecturers live from miles away. I live in Leicestershire, so that's reasonably nearby. But that's a pattern we're seeing all over. So I think when people talk about changing transport, often that means changing the way that they live their lives. And that, I guess for me, that's one of the reasons that we find it so difficult. So what I was going to do is look at a couple of examples that might be useful, might be good starters around solutions, and then perhaps introduce where I see, some trends. First one would be Curitiba, which is often very much seen as it's in Brazil, and it's seen as sort of the location of sustainable transport. It's a planned city, that's relevant. So obviously it's seen pretty dramatic rises in the number of people living there, but a lot of it's been planned around their bus system. I'm not saying that buses are necessarily the sort of be all and end all, but the vast majority of kind of people who are moving around do use this. It's a very extensive network of buses. You can sort of use the whole system for relatively cheaply, and I think it's a set fee. It's also integrated with cycle lanes, and every time a development comes in, they have to be thinking about how how transport works. So it's an interesting one. I'm happy to talk more about Curitiba, but I think that's a bit of an overview. Another one to look at, which might be interesting, again, I know a bit more about this one, would be Copenhagen in Denmark. I very nearly showed you a graph for this, but I've kind of not done that. As I've said, it's sort of the capital of sustainable transport in the UK, in certainly Europe. A lot of this sort of the trends that we see now, which is that most people cycle, vehicles or motor transport seems to be decreasing. I say walking and cycling are still increasing. A lot of it stems back to sort of 1970, the sort of fuel crisis. I think that was the impetus for this. And as I say, there's real political consensus about this when you talk to people in Copenhagen. I should say that my own PhD was in politics and governance, so that gives you a bit of a flavour of what I'm interested in. But increasingly, yeah, the direction of travel for transport, if that's is that people are active travel, walking and cycling more, and yeah, motor vehicles are increasing or decreasing. So it's an interesting example, but very much about that long-term trend. It's not happened overnight. It's probably been 50 years, but certainly recent years, with pushes around climate change, the move to active travel has kind of accelerated.
Jonathan, just got under 2 minutes left.
Perfect. Okay, that's good. So in terms of the futures, as I see it and what we look at, it seems to me that there are two broad trends. The first is around a tech push, so moving towards things like electric vehicles, what do we call them? Connected autonomous vehicles. Apologies for the jargon. Smart technologies around, I don't know, sort of, things like the sort of clever sat navs and numbers of people in cities. This is very much what I think most of our government are quite like. This is the approach that they're pushing. I think what's attractive about the tech push approach is that it means that we can kind of pretty much carry on as normal. We can, as to people who advocate it, that's the idea. We can replace our existing motor vehicles with electric vehicles, and it's pretty much a like-for-like swap, albeit with some different infrastructure. The alternative pathway would be around behaviour change, and I think if we look at sort of central government in the UK, there's less appetite for this, less interest. But we know around promoting walking, promoting cycling, but it's tricky as well. Perhaps also having fewer journeys, or I think we've all seen a bit of a change in this recently with COVID, more remote working. So that's kind of for me, those are the two pathways that we're broadly speaking seeing. And I don't know, I think I probably have I finished early now? Have I?
No, it was just my alarm is just going off now.
Good.
So that's
right.
Great.
All done. Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, no, I'm sure there are, and I've seen people sort of looking very thoughtful and jotting down things. So if there's any questions that you feel you'd like to put to Jonathan, then bear those in mind. Right.
Stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's great. So I'm going to move on to Gillian now from Leeds University. Same thing, Gillian. 10 minutes, and I'll give you I'll sort of rudely interrupt 2 minutes before the end, if that's okay.
Material afterwards to refer to. So hi everybody, really nice to be here, and I always like to start these kind of events by thanking you for being here and giving up your time, because it's just so important. I am a professor of transport and energy is my full title, but I have looked at mobility, personal mobility, passenger mobility, so not so much on the freight side, for what feels like forever, and trying to understand how we can quickly get the carbon out of the transport system is my thing. And so I suppose the first thing that I just want to say, because I like to concentrate the minds first of all, that there are two main ways of getting the carbon down from transport. And one is to get the carbon out of the fuels that are burnt within the system. So that's essentially getting rid of the fossil fuels, getting rid of the carbon also that's used when we're generating electricity, for when we're using electric vehicles, because of course they're not fully carbon free so long as we're generating electricity by fossil fuels as well. Okay, so that's getting the carbon out. That's method number one. Method number two is to just have less travel going on in the system. So they're your two basic ways of doing it. One of the problems that we have had recently is that we have been getting some of the carbon out of our transport system, in that we are slowly bringing in electric vehicles, and we are also getting tiny bits of biofuels into our fuels. So you might not know that every tank of petrol that you buy, there's a bit of biofuels mixed in with the fossil fuels. So we're gradually getting that down. Unfortunately, what's been happening at the same time is that the cars that we drive have been getting bigger and heavier. So we've counted.
What are biofuels?
Oh, sorry, right. Biofuels is a way of generating a substitute for fossil fuels, a way of generating a liquid fuel out of plant-based materials. So they can be plants that are grown specifically to turn into fuels, like maize is often done for that, and that generates ethanol. You've probably heard there are some countries like Brazil that have a really large amount of that in their system. Or the other way of generating biofuels is from waste from other parts of the food process and growing processes that we do. Yeah, it's just we can't do enough of that really sustainably. It'd be great if we just did that, wouldn't it? It would be great if that was the solution, just grow it and put it in, but we haven't got enough land for that. So one of the problems is that as we decarbonise, as we get the fossil fuels out, we need to try not to negate that by having more cars and certainly more heavier cars. So in the last year, for instance, in the UK, for every one electric vehicle that was sold, 15 SUVs were sold at the same time. And the growth in SUVs is happening faster than the growth in the uptake of electric vehicles. So over the next decade, whilst people are still allowed to buy these cars, and if we keep on growing the amount of SUVs, we're really storing a lot of carbon in the air and a lot of fossil fuels into the system, because these cars will be driving around for really quite a long time. So this is why if and when you hear anybody talk about, how are we going to meet the Paris Agreement targets, what we're going to do in transport, people like me, people who churn the numbers and do all the models, say we simply cannot do it without some reduction in the amount that we travel. It doesn't matter even that we've got a target for 2030 to stop selling fossil fuel cars. Even if we go that quickly with that and meet that, we still have to reduce some of the amount that we travel. So how are we going to do that? Well, what we do is we tend to focus on the commute, and we tend to focus on urban travel an awful lot. And we talk about one of the main solutions that we talk about is getting people onto active travel, walking and cycling, out of their cars onto active travel. Fantastic, and we need to do that as much as we possibly can. But I just want to caution you, not to put you off that, but just to make sure you don't only focus on that. Firstly, to say is that commuting is only about 20%, about a fifth, about 2 in 10 of every journeys that we do is a commute. Most of the miles that are going on out there in the system are actually for leisure purposes, for all the different sort of basically non-work stuff we do, including shopping, but longer trips to visit friends and family. So we have to also get out of a mindset of commuting and urban, and think about the fact that in order to tackle this, we've got to be much more thinking about longer trips, and trips that aren't just very regular for A to B every single day, and that's really quite challenging. When we think about active travel, we often say the Netherlands, they've got it right, they're fantastic. And if you look at the figures, they look fantastic, because almost a third of every time somebody goes out the door in the Netherlands, they do it on a bike, which is absolutely amazing. And that compares to 2%. So 2 out of every 100 times a person goes out their door here, they do it on a bike, okay? So we think, fantastic, Netherlands got it right. Well, actually their carbon footprint, their average per capita carbon footprint from travel in the Netherlands is the same as ours. And why is that? Because they love their cars, they love their big cars, and they love to drive them on long distance leisure an awful lot. So we need to think about making places that people want to live in and work in and have more leisure time in than they do at the moment. So we need to shrink the distances that people travel. And the other thing is to talk about longer distance cycling. So let's think about e-bikes. Jonathan mentioned Copenhagen, and they're one of the things they're doing, because they realise this problem, just like the Netherlands, that the actual average carbon footprint isn't coming down, is that they're building long distance cycle routes out of the city centre, connecting suburbs, connecting outer towns, between outer towns. We don't even think about doing that here. Imagine having cycle routes along trunk roads, or I mean more pleasantly it would be sort of off-road routes, but longer distance cycle routes, because e-bikes are actually proving to be, even in countries where bikes are really owned by everybody already, e-bikes are going a lot faster in other countries than they are here.
Gillian,
so
just under 2 minutes, just under 2 minutes left.
Okay,
thank
fine.
you.
So we need to think about discouraging people from buying larger cars. So locally, one of the things we can do is really think about parking policies, about parking permits and charges on the larger vehicles and the heavier vehicles as higher than other vehicles. We need to discourage these vehicles where we can. We need to think about e-bikes, so e-bike sharing schemes, e-bike subsidising schemes, e-bike schemes through workplaces, e-bike training, e-bike lending, etc. We also need to think about shrinking journey distances. So it's not just about getting people out of their cars onto something else, but getting them to use their local facilities, making sure local shops and post offices don't close, making sure we don't build houses on sites that aren't connected by anything other than the car. And we need to improve all the systems of public transport and walking and cycling that we do have. For that, we need money. The first thing to say about that is that we have been subsidising public transport, even though it's privatised in this country largely. We subsidise it. It's still hugely subsidised, but we could use that subsidy much, much better. One of the main things is we have to organise public transport regionally, and we have to have minimum standards like they do in places like Germany and Switzerland, to say places of a certain size get this many buses per day, per hour, and the tickets are one ticketing system, and they're subsidised, if not cheaper.
could I ask you just to wrap up now? Is that right? Thank you.
The final thing to say is there are ways in which money can be raised locally. Again, it's a rejigging of a lot of taxes or whatever that are already levied, such as business taxes. We start to call them an eco-levy, and we tie them very specifically to say so that it's raised on businesses with the most car parking spaces, that are using the most cars, the heavier cars, etc. So we target the taxes, not necessarily raise them overall, but we shuffle them around differently so that they're targeted to actually really target and change the things we want to change.
Thank you. That's I feel very reluctant to stop people because there's so much interesting things there, but hopefully you've got some good ideas about questions that you might like to follow up with Gillian about in the big question and answer session, and also in the small group discussions that will follow as well. So Margaret Smith, who's the team leader of transport planning at Warwickshire County. Margaret.
So I'm Margaret Smith. I'm a team leader in transport planning at Warwickshire County Council, and I'm going to do a very quick whistle-stop tour of all things transport in Warwick District. Some of the data I have is for the county rather than the district, but I'll try and flag up where the data is from. So the first thing was just to outline what's happening now. So I thought the quickest way to explain this is to say that we have a transport strategy for the area, and essentially what that seeks to do is to enable people to travel. Yet people don't travel for the sake of it. They're traveling because they want to get to work, or they want to get to school, they want to go shopping, or for leisure trips. And essentially what we need to do is to try and support these trips in a way which helps the economy, but also at the same time trying to protect the environment, which is a key consideration that you're looking at today, and also keeping people safe and keeping them healthy. And in terms of the healthy side, that can either be linked to the air quality side of things, but also, as Gillian said, it's about trying to get people more active, trying to get them walking, trying to get them cycling. So in terms of that strategy, we have a number of choices that we have to make. We have to identify priorities, but we have to accept that there will always be trade-offs. We have a limited amount of space to work with, and as a county council, we don't have all the powers, we have some powers. So the next slide. So really this was just to pick out the scale of the challenge that we have. In terms of this graph, it does look at the whole of Warwickshire. It does focus on the commute. The reason we focus on the commuting side of things is because we have to acknowledge that the largest proportion of traffic, the peak traffic, where it has the biggest impact, generally happens in the peak morning commute. So essentially from this graph, we can see the middle section is the amount of people who are commuting by car on their own to work, and it's significant. And really, I just wanted to show how significant that is compared to the other modes, which you can see in the other colours. And essentially, the other modes have decreased, and we have a big challenge ahead of us to try and shift that. And then what I wanted to do was just to outline what some of those key issues are in terms of making that shift. And these are specific to the area. So one of the key issues is that there isn't a key focus for people's trips. There is a huge number of places that people want to get to, and that's quite different in our area compared to a city, for example. And it can mean that it's more difficult to serve by public transport. The other thing just to flag up is that there's a lot of free parking at workplaces. And again, we know that a key factor in terms of how people decide to travel to work is the availability of a free parking space at their workplace. And then another key issue is how attractive or convenient the alternatives are. There are real safety concerns about some of the infrastructure for cycling, for example, in the area, and the quality of that infrastructure is quite variable. And also linking to bus travel, there is a perception that there's a relatively high cost of bus travel. Part of that is if you're just making a single trip, it can be quite expensive, whereas if you're buying a weekly pass or a season ticket, the cost comes down. And linked to that is people having the right information. Sorry, I'm getting a bit, because of the timing, I think I'm panicking myself.
No, you're all right. You're not even halfway through yet, Margaret, so
Okay,
you're doing fine. Thank you. No, the pace is great.
So part of that is around people having the information to know what the options are. You know there's a car outside your house. If you know where your destination is, you can put the information into your sat nav. It's all very sorted out for you. It's more difficult if you don't know what the public transport options are, or even where the cycle routes go. And just to say that it's not a static situation. Demand for travel will continue to grow. That's not just because of Warwick District's growth in terms of housing and employment, but also that of neighbouring areas. So I've outlined key issues. You'll be pleased to know there are some opportunities. So within the Warwick and Leamington urban area, there is a significant number of short distance trips. So it works out at roughly 1 in 4 trips are less than 2 kilometres. That's just over a mile. 45% of journeys, so again, it's journeys to work, are less than 5 kilometres, that's 3 miles. And I wanted to try and put that in the perspective of, you know, a lot of people know that you try and do 10,000 steps a day. That's equivalent to roughly 5 miles. So, you know, if you've got to walk 2 miles for your journey to work, there and back, you've not even met your 10,000 steps. So that just kind of sets the scale of what we're trying to do here. So there is a huge potential to switch if we can get the right infrastructure. This was just to give the perspective of what those different zones mean, what that distance actually means in terms of this area. And then in terms of opportunities, again, we've talked about the variable trips. There are longer distance trips, but there are some key destinations for those longer distance trips. So Coventry to the north, and then south to the Stratford area, and that includes to Gaydon. And again, we can focus our efforts on some of those key corridors to try and maximise the impacts. So in terms of bringing it down to what does that actually mean in terms of our area, again, because of the time, I've really tried to focus in on just a couple of examples. So for our key urban corridors, so this is the Emscott Road corridor. How do we try and reimagine that space? We can see that there's already cycle links on those roads. How do we make those better, but accepting that there will always be constraints because we've still got to have an element of a number of different users, including buses, for example. And then also we're looking at the urban and interurban corridors. So I've mentioned about some of those longer distance trips. Really for this one, we're trying to capture those longer distance trips, potentially at some sites where we can set up a park and ride site. The onward connection is then either by bus or it could be by bicycle. We've talked about e-bikes. That really helps to increase the range. And then I'd also just like to say about car sharing. So there is already a car sharing site platform within the area. It's the largest in the country. People can use this today. In terms of the trips, you can see there a huge range of trips coming into the area. We've also recently got the car club that has just set up. So this is a commercial operation. They come in, private enterprise, to set up a car club in the area.
Margaret, you've just got a bit more than 2 minutes left.
Okay, that's fine. And we've also touched on, you know, if COVID's done anything in terms of people being able to work from home and having remote meetings, so removing the need to travel. But we also need to make car journeys less attractive. I think others have picked on the issues around some of the pricing policies. Some of that could be around parking charges, restrictions on where people can park. Just really quickly on the role of electric cars. I think, again, people have picked up on this. Even if we have the government ban, the work we've done anticipates that 40% of the vehicle fleet will be electric by 2030. There's still a significant amount that would be your petrol and diesel vehicles still running around on our network. It doesn't address congestion and it doesn't encourage people to be active. So who needs to take action? So I've highlighted this in terms of the residents. We all make decisions on how we travel, where we travel and when we travel. There's a role for private business, specifically to set examples. We've got some really good examples in the local area. We've got the public sector, so this is government at all levels. And whilst as a local council, we do have some tools to discourage car use, it can be difficult to gain political and public support, especially because neighbouring areas may not be doing the same thing. Those are just examples I can skip back to if anybody wants to see them. In terms of who pays, I think we've talked about that. So in summary, there are trade-offs, difficult choices will need to be made. There's only a limited amount of space for transport. We need a step change. We've seen the scale of the challenge and we need a joined up response. There's a role for residents, for the private and public sector, and potentially we need to start looking at charging for some of these things.
Right, so the first three speakers have all been speaking about the kind of general picture with regard to transport. They've had 10 minutes each. We're now going to come on to two more specific viewpoints, and each of the last two speakers will have 5 minutes. So I'm going to come on to Hayley now, who's from the Chamber of Trade. Brilliant. Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Brilliant. Hi guys. So yeah, as they've said, I am Hayley Key and I am chairman of Leamington Chamber of Trade, which is a voluntary organisation made up by businesses in Leamington. Therefore, I do own a business in Leamington, and it happens to be a retail business, which I think gives quite a good perspective of what the issues are in terms of, I know a lot of people are worried particularly about the air quality on the parade, obviously made up mostly by retail properties. So the three areas I want to talk about was the three main things sort of happening to business. It's been touched on quite a bit, but obviously main people, it's commuting. That's the sort of the main aspect of, I guess, personal climate issues, I guess. But in terms of the actual, for businesses, the main things would be, for retail businesses, obviously it's about goods, and that's goods in and goods out. Obviously, the way people are at the moment, if you order something, you want it the next day. That's both, as I say, for the business coming in and also for the person buying from that business. And that's certainly one of the main issues that I would say businesses are sort of tackling. I think the commute's been quite covered by the previous speakers, in the fact that it's about changing people's habits and maybe finding other ways to commute. The issue obviously with goods transfer is cost, and that will be always the issue, will always come down to cost, and that's both to the supplier but also to the business receiver. If every item you purchase as a customer had a £10 green tax, so that the company used green ways of delivering, you aren't as likely to buy it as if something had a free delivery on it. And that's likewise with the actual businesses as well. So I think that's the main area that sort of needs to be looked at, particularly if we take a really sort of local example, the high street, the parade in Leamington. That's an area where often it's been discussed of how do you do that in a greener way. And there's a few sort of ideas that are always thrown around. One being that you do a sort of the last mile in a greener way. So it's done on foot by sort of more deliverers. So you can have your big companies, they go to one smaller depot, say at the top of the parade, and then it's individually distributed below that. But as I say, the issue with all that is any form of cost. And I think that's the main issue of sort of pushing it out to businesses. And I think that comes back a little bit on transport and the commute as well. Certainly, obviously, if anyone has the opportunity to claim back their mileage as a business, they are likely to do that for ease. So it's a way of sort of finding that in a sort of more commercial way. Let's make sure I covered everything. Oh yeah, so it's just that one of the questions, obviously, who needs to take action, I guess, on this, and I think the three areas for sort of certainly for Leamington particularly is Obviously, any large industries, they're the boss. You know, they need to be proactively supporting greener ways for their staff to be moving around the country or coming into the area. And likewise, that's with goods. The biggest one being obviously large haulage companies. So if you have most industries buy their goods on sort of quarterly or half yearly. Certainly our business, we work on 2 seasons. So we get big deliveries in every every half of year. That can only be done on articulated lorries. They are not green in any means, and they are coming through obviously to us. But so my colleagues at the Royal Priors, they probably have 10 large lorries every day into the Royal Priors. And that's something obviously needs to be looked at if you are going to be bringing the air quality down in sort of the centre of towns. And likewise, shipping that out. If you, as a consumer, demand next day delivery, the only way to do that is to send goods out daily. Daily goods means a lot more vans on the road. If everyone was prepared to wait weekly for their deliveries, companies could send out their orders weekly, and that would cut transport quite dramatically. And so I think it's the consumer has to think about it a little bit as well. What are you prepared to sacrifice, I guess, for an industry to go a bit greener? And I think they're my points.
Thank you, Hayley. That's brilliant. So our final speaker, we're going to go for 5 minutes to Mark Whitelocks, who is the Managing Director of Stagecoach Midlands. So Mark, do you need to screen share or are you?
No, thank you. I was encouraged not to provide any slides, so I've been good.
That's great. That's brilliant. Thank you, Mark. All right, I'll give you an extra 30 seconds for that. That's all right. Over to you.
Evening, everyone. Pleasure to be here, and good to have an opportunity to talk to you all. Just addressing the questions that I've been asked to address, really. Just taking the first one, what's happening now? From a public transport operator and a bus operator's point of view, I think over the last few months with the COVID pandemic, we've seen some of the trends that have been there for some time now accelerate. So a couple of the speakers have already identified that public transport usage has been in decline for some time, and that has obviously accelerated through the pandemic as people have reverted to online shopping for their retail. And indeed working from home, which many of my colleagues have even been having to do in response to the pandemic. So that is going to be one of the key challenges that we need to bear in mind. And Gillian talked about reducing travel. That is one thing that we have done quite successfully over the last few weeks and months as we've all been responding to the pandemic. And I guess some of that will be a legacy as we move forward. But that does present some challenges for public transport operators, and I'll come back to that in a couple of minutes, or a minute or so. So I think in addition to that and the change in passenger numbers and the change in travel patterns, the other things that we're currently looking at the moment and going on are how we look at greening our fleet. Obviously, we are a transport operator and we burn through quite a bit of fuel using current technologies. So we're looking at how do we change that, and that might be electric, it could be hydrogen or more fuel efficient use in our vehicles. What needs to change and how? I think from my point of view, we've kind of already spoken tonight about single occupancy and short distance car trips, that they are something that we can all focus on, both as individuals and think about why do we choose the car, and from a local authority and a national government point of view, I guess there's an opportunity to also think about what the policies are that make us currently choose the car. So I think as individuals, we've probably all welcomed the Chancellor standing up every year for the last few years saying fuel duty is going to be frozen, but that has artificially lowered the price of car travel, for instance, and has perhaps given that more of an incentive to use that mode of travel, for instance. So I think there's things like that we can consider. Planning also has a big impact on how we change and how we move around. Some of the examples I'm useless with names, but some of the examples that Jonathan highlighted in his presentation were clearly where transport systems had been designed around public transport and bus usage, and I guess that isn't something that we've been used to in this country all of the time. Transport's kind of evolved as places have evolved, and as particularly new developments, if bus isn't given some of the thought that it should do, we end up with lots of cul-de-sacs that are very difficult to penetrate, and widespread developments that are hard to give an effective service and connect places up. And Margaret referred to that as well in terms of where people's destinations are. So how we plan spaces and how we make use of the infrastructure that we've got is also important. How we use car parking, I think, is something that other speakers have picked up as well, and I guess some of the policies around that are things that we would, or I would like to challenge people on. Car parking is normally quite cheap, and it's actually quite difficult to run bus services and cover costs of operation at the same price as car parking, given all the other costs that we incur. So how can that, and I guess in a climate change sense of point of view, and looking at the emissions and the damage that does do car parking prices really reflect currently the kind of potential implications and damage that is done by providing that at that price? So are there things that we can do with pricing that influence that? And I guess
just under a minute left, Mark.
Yeah, okay. Funding going into public transport is also always a big ask. And we can perhaps use parking or the availability of car parking spaces to generate additional revenues by charging a levy, which is then used to support public transport. They in themselves probably won't cause modal shift, but the funding that they generate could potentially be used to provide incentives and things to do. I think lots of other things that I could talk about, but I guess who needs to take action? I guess the big point I want to make here is that we all have to do this together. No one person or no one organisation has got all the answers. Operators need to do their part by running high quality transport services at good value for money. Local governments need to support that where possible through policy decisions, and also, I guess, their use of infrastructure through the planning systems, and what revenue they have got to help maintain networks. People use bus because it fits in with their lives. People don't like waiting. Buses have to be frequent and reliable, and there can be some support from that through local government to help maintain that. And I guess national government set the overarching policies about how we should approach things and set those kind of national policies. So I mentioned fuel tax, but it could be road charging, or it could be planning, and what we should be considering and how we should be putting those things together.